So I'd like to welcome the next storyteller to the stage, Jordan.
Hello, everybody. My name's Jordan. I'm a little bit awkward when it comes to feelings, so you'll probably hear a couple jokes here and there. I might laugh, you might not, who knows. So I'm going to try to paraphrase 3 years that were quite crucial to my life. And the story was not so linear with my arts education. And I remember Ashley and I were chatting about how we were going to piece this together, and it was a lot of different cycles and circles of how our lives kind of go about, and how different things pop up again and again, and there'll be at different times where you forget about them and they'll pop up at just the right moments. So it's a bit of a cycle of how this story came about. So it took me 6 years and 3 different universities to get a BFA education. BFA is just a Bachelor of Fine Arts. So some people would think it's quite an easy path, but for myself it wasn't. So this is relevant, but I wanted to be a basketball player in high school. I wasn't as tall as I was now. I was about 5'3", and I was about 110 pounds. So I was applying for I was put in positions to be a point guard instead of power forward or something like that. But anyways, I went to a school that was a lot about excellence, and we'll keep it short. When the basketball career didn't work out, I just looked at my marks, and I noticed that I was doing really well in photography, and I decided, if somebody has a kind of a people-pleasing mentality within the sports, I just decided, I'm gonna do photography. That's what I'm gonna be good at. And so, I spent 4 years trying to be the best that I could with photography, and I got really good marks, and that all made sense to me. So, I got a 99 in photography, and I was like, okay, that's good, but like, what happened to that 1%? So I remember I ended up getting a scholarship to go study at the Art Institute of Vancouver to study poster design. I was interested in graphic design at the time, and it was just a little bit too expensive, a little bit out of reach, and there were a couple of different voices that were just telling me not to do that, so I didn't. So I went to a different school, or I wanted to go to the Alberta College of Art and Design, which is in Calgary. And so I went to one of their portfolio days while I was in high school, and they said, we need to see some of your fine arts stuff. I said, well, I don't have that stuff. I'm interested in photography and graphic design. They said, well, we still need to see that you know how to draw the human figure, you know how to draw flowers in a vase. You need to know how to do these kinds of fine arts things. So right out of high school, I went to the U of S for 1 year to apply to the Alberta College of Art and Design after, because that was the plan, and that's what I wanted to do. And so when I got accepted into ACAD, that was my dream school, and that's what I was set out to do. And I was going to go into graphic design. I was going to work for a company, and I was going to please those clients, and I was going to make really good work for them. And I remember taking the one graphic design course at ACAD, and I got a C-, and it was kind of the end of my world, and I hated graphic design. It was a point where it just didn't make sense to me. So I go into these different kinds of spirals of cycles of trying to figure out why I'm here and what's going to be of interest to me. And so I gravitated towards the fine arts side of things just because there was a major called drawing, and it was the loosest defined. So I didn't have to define it, and that's what made me comfortable about it. And so I was at that school for about 2.5 years, and the first 2 years of an arts education, the teachers, they tell you what mediums to do, what themes to explore, and that made sense because I was gonna please the instructor, I was gonna please my peers, and I was gonna get the marks, and that made sense to me. And then third year rolls around, and they say, here's your studio, do whatever you want. And at that point, I was in a total panic because I didn't know what I cared about. I didn't know what I wanted to make. And so I ended up doing a lot of panic moves as an artist. I ended up looking at the unknown because it was comfortable for me. It wasn't necessarily because I was interested in it, but it was enough for me to continue on and figure out these unknown things and stay in that kind of bubble. And so I would spend about 12 to 14 hours a day in the studio for 6 of the 7 days a week, and that was kind of the that made sense to me. And it's wild how these things really make sense to you, but they don't when I say it out loud. So in my final year, my third year of ACAD, I technically dropped out because I hit a point where a lot of different things started to spiral out of control, and I wasn't able to catch myself. And so I hit this point where I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know what I was passionate about, and it was the level of anxiousness where it was either fight or flight, and I decided that I needed to leave. And that was a really hard moment for me because ACAD was my dream school. That's where I wanted to go. That's where I saw my education starting and finishing, and then going into be some kind of artist in whatever form that was going to be. So I went back to Saskatchewan, and I spent a year here studying philosophy and psychology, inadvertently probably for some reason to figure out what was going on in my own head. And I decided that I wasn't going to be an artist anymore, and my rationale decision was to be a social work officer in the Navy. Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. But that somehow made sense because it was it was the farthest thing that I could think of that was away from being an artist. And then the second thing, probably psychoanalyzing myself, is that I could deal with other people's problems instead of my own. So I was running, obviously. And that year was tough because it was, again, it was things that, there could be an easier way to just, go about a profession that wasn't being an artist. And so I was humming and hawing for a year, and then I decided that I needed to go back to an art school. And it was the smallest voice in my head that told me to do that, which is usually how things go. So I paid attention to that one, and I went out to the coast. I went out to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I finished up my BFA degree at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And I just remember how difficult it was to go back as a third year, having not done any art for that year because I didn't want to be an artist anymore. And starting out as a first year, kind of discovering, what I was passionate about again. And figuring out, what direction I was going to take. And so I just remember this switch where I didn't care anymore about, in a good way. I didn't care about the marks. I didn't care about pleasing instructors. I didn't even, I cared about my peers as enough to try to give them as much good advice as I could. But I just remember there was such a weight lifted that I didn't have to please anybody. And I just had to be comfortable with the artwork that I was producing for myself. And I think that's really kind of the number one thing when it becomes, when you're an artist like myself that deals with a lot of like abstract concepts. And I still deal with the aspects of the unknown, but it's I'm looking for answers within the unknown. I'm more comfortable finding those things instead of staying in the unknown as the comfortability. And so those couple years were pretty fantastic. And I remember spending the same amount of time in the studio, but it was from this positive mindset. And the days flew by, and I was creating a lot of work that really resonated with me, and it really resonated with the ideas that I was interested in exploring. And so, you'd think that kind of the end of the story would be, and then I finally graduated. And that was the biggest, epiphanic moment of my arts education, but it wasn't. It was when I dropped out of ACAD and went through an entire year of just a loss of self, and then listening to that little voice in the back of your head saying that, you need to go back to art school, you need to finish this up. And so that was the biggest moment when I look back on it, and I think that's kind of how I go about the decisions that I make nowadays. Is that I'm always listening to that tiny little voice in the back of my head. Thanks.